You've probably heard someone say something like, well, that's a third world country, or this feels like a third world country. Or maybe you've read a headline calling an African nation a third world country. But have you ever stopped to ask, what does that even mean? Who decided that? And why are we still using terms like third world country? Where did the term come from? Well, the term third world actually came out of the Cold War in the mid 20th century. You might be asking, well, what is the Cold War? Some of you from different generations might not know, but the Cold War was a period of political tension, military rivalry, and ideological conflict between the United States and its allies, which were capitalist democracies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, communist states. The time frame of this, historians generally say it was between 1947, right after the World War II, up to 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Why cold? Well, because it wasn't actually an outright war between the two superpowers. Instead, it was fought through like a proxy, like Korea and Vietnam, espionage, propaganda, nuclear arms races, and political influence. I know growing up, we used to always talk about the threat of nuclear war. The world was essentially divided into two camps, what was referred to as the US-led capitalist bloc, and then the Soviet-led communist bloc, and then the rest of the world. So that was how it was essentially divided around the world. I'm bringing this up because I keep seeing in my comment section people saying third world country, third world country. That's why I'm bringing this up, because the conversation needs to be had. So when was the first world, second world, third world concept first used? Well, the first recorded use of these three worlds terminology came from a French demographer and anthropologist named Alfred Sauvy. I hope I've said the name correctly. In an article that was published in L'Observatoire in August 14th, 1952. The article was called Three Worlds, One Planet in that particular publication. And in that article, Sauvy compared the third world to France's third estate before the French Revolution, which was a group that was ignored and underrepresented, but it was full of potential. Here's the original context. So first world, Western capitalist countries that are aligned with the United States. Second world, communist socialist states that are aligned with the USSR, Union of Socialist Soviet Republic. Third world, nations that were not aligned with either side. Not aligned. Either most of them were newly independent countries coming from colonial rule, like Africa, countries in Africa, countries in Asia, and countries in Latin America. They were the rest of the world. Interesting piece of information is that the term third world wasn't meant to mean poor. Sauvy was actually making a political alignment statement, as I explained earlier. So within a couple of decades, media and politicians had completely twisted it into a label for underdeveloped countries that were considered to be poor. Many countries in the so-called third world were dealing with challenges of being impoverished, which made it easy for the term to be used to refer to being poor. And back then, the world was essentially split into those three blocks. It was used a lot, and it's still used today. And often most people that are using it don't even know how and what it actually means, how it started, the original context. And this is an example of how media has the power to change the narrative and not share the full truth. I'm going to explain it again. First world, countries aligned with the United States and its allies, mostly capitalist democracies. Second world, countries aligned with the Soviet Union, communist states. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. It collapsed in 1991. Third world, everyone else, countries that were not aligned with either side. Many of them at the time were newly independent nations, like in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. I'm repeating this again because I said it earlier, but I'm repeating it again in case you missed or misunderstood the first time I said it. It wasn't originally meant to be an insult, but over time, the term started to be used for the synonym of poor, underdeveloped, or backward. And that's where problems began and still continue. I see comment sections from some of my Canadian people who say things like, Canada's turned into a third world country. And it's such an outdated thing to say, and it can be seen as insulting, and it also can cause confusion. Because really, is Canada a so-called third world country? You know, it's like when I see those comments, it's just so absolutely ridiculous because they're really using it to insult the way that things are happening in the country, insult the things that they're seeing around them. So it's really wild. And then when people say things like, Ghana is a third world country, those are the kind of things that I hear all the time. Africa gets labeled this way a lot because so many African countries, they had gained independence during that Cold War period, and they were not listed as being in the so-called first or second world camps. They ended up getting lumped in this whole third world category, but the label has stuck and continues to be stuck, even though that Cold War has ended. And it's partly due to the stereotypes that continue, biased media portrayals, and outdated economic rankings. And then now, the shift of the term developing country. I mean, I know I've used that term before as well because it is something that is easily understood. In more recent years, international organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, have been using the term developing country instead. It sounds better, right? As I said, I've even used that for better representation than to use the term third world. It is very complicated because developing still suggests that there is a hierarchy, as if Western nations are the so-called the goal or the finish line, and that everyone else is always trying to reach that so-called goal or finish line. Because it actually ignores the fact that development can look different depending on the history and culture and the priorities of a country, right? And who's decided on these labels? Right now, it's mostly economists and political scientists, big global institutions like the IMF, the World Bank. What they do is they look at the GDP of a country, they look at its industrialization, its infrastructure, and sometimes social indicators like life expectancy or literacy. The problem with that is, those are all measured by standards that are rooted in Western history and Western priorities, which doesn't always reflect the full reality and the strengths of each individual country. So, as I said, I've been wanting to have this conversation because I often see people using the term third world country when they're making comments about Ghana and other African countries. They'll be like, I don't want to leave a first world country and move to a third world country. Why would I go there? Blah, blah, blah. It's a wild thing because, people associate it with a lot of negativity without looking at some of the history that's deeply rooted in some of these countries that were classified as being so-called third world. As I explained earlier, that how these things were divided was really political and was really about alignment to the U.S., alignment to USSR, or no alignment at all. Using the phrase casually can be very inaccurate and can be very dismissive of the real challenges that the people in those countries face who may have fewer resources. So I really wanted to just make this video to have this conversation about the whole third world country terminology. It is an outdated Cold War term that was never meant to be a measure of worth or potential or poverty. It was simply lumping countries based on who they aligned with. And as I said earlier, they were either aligned with the US, the USSR, or nobody at all. If we want to talk about inequality, infrastructure, or governance, we should do it with a level of precision and a little bit of respect. Because, language and the words we use shape perception, and perception ends up shaping reality. The term third world, as I keep saying, is outdated and it's not typically used in modern classifications. So we really should stop using it. But unfortunately, it's so embedded in the fabric of society that I don't think it'll ever change. I think people are going to just keep using it over and over again. What do you think about it? Have you learned something today? Did you know the origins of the term first world, second world, third world? Or did you just find out today when I'm explaining it to you? Please do share it in the comments. Let's have a conversation and discussion about this. Thank you so much for watching. If you love my content, please make sure that you support by hitting the subscribe button, liking and sharing this video, joining my community by becoming a member, supporting through PayPal or through Zelle. All of the information is linked in the description of the video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Ivy Prosper, and I'll see you next time.